We've been told that the war on terror is like any organized enemy we've ever faced, but that might actually be wrong. The bureaucracy of al-Qaeda now revealed in new documents just released from the raid that killed Osama bin Laden tell us a very interesting story about the structure of this terror group. Well, Eric, we're learning much more about Osama bin Laden from a trove of documents recovered in his compound and just released by the government this week, including the terror leader's obsession with attacking America and his fixation on our way of life, plus the apparent bureaucracy that comes with managing a terrorist organization like al-Qaeda. Tom Joscelyn is senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, senior editor of the Long Word Journal, and as promised, coming back from yesterday when we first got this news.
Right.
And now you had a little time to look over this.
Had a few hours to look through the actual documents.
A few hours. In those few hours, anything new?
I think we've seen some new nuggets. Yeah, I mean, they're new nuggets. This is clearly not the juiciest stuff. That's what we have to keep in mind here. This is really a small fraction of what was recovered, and it's really not the best stuff that's in the U.S. government's possession, which we wouldn't expect them to release that right away. It's going to take pressure to basically get more good information out of them. But we do see some nuggets. And
you have talked to us about why you believe it's necessary and it would be good for the public to see some of these documents. Let me ask you about the bureaucracy that we mentioned in the intro. If I had a penny for every time someone said fighting terrorists is like a game of whack-a-mole, I would be a rich woman, right? Because people say, oh, they're popping up all over the place. We just can't, we can't find them. But when you look at some of the documents from bin Laden, you see a very, very organized organization.
Yeah, and it's an international organization. You know, there's this idea that the administration and some of the intelligence community have had that basically there's this core of al-Qaeda that's distinct and separate from everything else, and it's hunkered down in Pakistan waiting to be droned to death. The documents tell a very different story. The drones clearly had a big impact on al-Qaeda. They still have a big impact on al-Qaeda, but al-Qaeda took a number of steps to overcome the drones as well. In addition, the drones have only had a mild success, I would say, in terms of combating al-Qaeda's geographic expansion. So one of the things we see in the document, for example, is that in really the height of the drone campaign, Osama bin Laden is actually talking about how he wants one of his chief lieutenants to work with Shabab in Somalia on implementing Sharia law inside Somalia. This is not a guy who feels like he's really on death's door here.
So we also have to use a different phrase, you know, to cut off the head of the snake, then you're going to kill the snake. Is that really something that we can use in the fight against al-Qaeda, that if we take out some of these key leaders, then the organization falls apart? Or is it really about number rather than the specific people that we kill?
Well, see, this is a great question, because the heart of U.S. strategy right now has been what we call a counterterrorism top-down strategy. Basically, lop off the top of the pyramid and they think the whole pyramid crumbles. The problem is al-Qaeda is not organized that way. They have a decentralized structure. It still answers to the top. It still answers up the chain of command. But they've decentralized structure to make sure if you cut off one head, another one will survive. And the problem is that we still don't understand that.
And with the bin Laden documents and what we've seen so far, how do we take that steps forward to what we're seeing today? Bin Laden is dead, but how is the organization of al-Qaeda actually doing?
Well, you know, this is the most amazing thing in all this. You know, we talk about ISIS a lot, and there's clearly ISIS is a big threat, and I don't want to, play that down at all. But al-Qaeda has actually gained more territory this year than ISIS has, and yet they do it in a different way. And so basically they really hide their hand and they don't advertise it the way ISIS does, but they clearly have gained more territory this year.
Now, that's surprising, because we started the show, one of the big stories today is Palmyra, this historic site. ISIS is taking it over. Of course, ISIS will send out photos, everything of them destroying, whatever sort of iconic figures are there. But al-Qaeda, I mean, I haven't heard anything about al-Qaeda in Syria, but you say they've gained more territory?
Sure. I mean, you talk about Palmyra, for example, right? That's a slow, ancient town. It's very important that they took that over, and we don't want to downplay that. But al-Qaeda really was the spearhead behind overtaking Idlib, the provincial capital of Idlib, earlier this year in late March. That's a much bigger city. That's a much bigger, more strategically important area. And really what al-Qaeda has done since late last year is consolidate their control over northwestern Syria. And they've had a lot of gains in that regard. And they're doing it in a way that's much more insidious, I think, because they're embedding themselves in the insurgency against the Assad regime, making it more and more difficult to actually combat them.
Wow, that's really interesting, because that's certainly something we haven't been talking a lot about. Let me ask you about something our viewers are going to see a lot of. If they pick up a newspaper or magazine, they're going to see the headlines that talk about bin Laden, really talking about what he's reading. I mean, that's sort of the big headline coming out of these documents. And I do read some tabloid magazines, Tom. I know that's probably not your reading,
No.
But there are sections that, when you read a tabloid, celebrities, they're just like us. Look, they're reading the books that we, read. They're wearing the shoes that we wear. And in some ways, it sort of feels like that. Look at bin Laden's reading the Bob Woodward book that everyone was reading here. Oh, that's so interesting. It almost is elevating him as a personality rather than a mass murderer.
Well, the question is, why was he reading those books? Why was he reading Bob Woodward's book? You know, some of the stuff that he read was conspiratorial, and Al-Qaeda has all sorts of conspiratorial ideas. It's really kooky nonsense in a lot of ways.
And a lot of people are dismissing this. Oh, look,
Right.
he's a weirdo, right?
Well, you know, but, you know, a lot of weirdos have wreaked havoc across the planet.
course.
I mean, Adolf Hitler was a nut job, you know, so this happens. But look at what he was reading very carefully. He was also reading stuff that speaks to our strategy, our strategic thinking, and how we're comprehending the war against him and his forces. And the most important thing here about this is, yes, we have this reading list that came out of his compound, but we don't have actual copies that he had in his possession. Those copies should be released because he had notes, detailed notes in what he was reading and commenting and basically explaining what he thought was important and what wasn't important. And that has not been released yet.
Interesting. He had copies of the 9/11 Commission report as well. So his reading went quite in depth. Tom, great to see you as always.
No, thanks.
More on this, of course. Eric?
Oh, thanks, John.